Welcome, everyone, to the next edition of the Unheated podcast. Today, we're delighted to have Rishi Stocker here from Safi, which is a UK based B2B online marketplace for trading recyclables. So, thank you so much, Rishi, for being here with us today. I'm really excited for this conversation. Quick intro on Rishi. Rishi started his career at a Unilever, where he essentially witnessed a need for better recycling processes in their packaging operations. He was also one of the earliest employees at the UK neobank Revolut, where he spent many years running global partnerships. He holds a BA in classics from Oxford. And a little bit about the company, which we'll also dive into during the discussion. But essentially, Safi as I mentioned before, an online marketplace where buyers and sellers can auction or bid for material, recyclable material with full transparency. The platform aims to bring efficiency and reliability to the recycling industry, which has traditionally relied on slow and manual processes. So, by digitizing the entire material trading experience from discovery and material inspection to payments and logistics, Safi enables recyclers to connect with global buyers more effectively. So, it was founded in 2021 and it's headquartered in London. And the company is also funded by top China tech investors like Lower Carbon Capital, along with Giant Capital, Passion Capital, Investment. So thanks a lot, Rishi, again for being with us, and look forward to this chat.
Great to be here, Priya.
Super. So perhaps we can start our discussion. Just sort of, perhaps you could help us understand, why did you start this company? What were some of the problems that you saw in the supply chain for recycling, and how we can sort of make this mainstream? Because obviously these large companies like Unilever, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, they have these very big targets for net zero, for EPR, extended producer responsibility, etc. But why are they not able to sort of fully transition to a fully circular economy? What is the need for a marketplace like that?
Sure, yeah. So after 8 years in fintech, I was very keen to work on something that would help us get to net zero as a planet. I looked at a few different ideas, and then I think my Unilever background that you touched on made me jump into the recycling space to really understand this point around why the big FMCGs struggle to hit high percentages of recycled content in their manufacturing of new products. And what was very interesting is, coming from the fintech world where most things have been digitized, when you jump into this world and you jump into how the waste sorting plants that collect waste from households and sort out the valuable plastics and metals, when you look at them and understand exactly their processes for A, producing their output, and then B, actually selling it onwards, ultimately to the Coca-Colas, Pepsis, and Unilevers of the world. We were struck by how antiquated and how offline and inefficient it actually was. So, we kept hearing the same thing, regardless of country we went to in Europe, whether it was UK or whether it was Greece or whether it was Spain or France, was ultimately the following problem. Most of the suppliers in developed markets, markets like the UK or the US, the supplier of recyclables, that is, because these are countries that have invested in collection infrastructure, recycling education to actually get this from households. And then most of the demand is actually located far away, so it's dislocated from the supply. It's on the other side of the planet. So in Europe, for example, for plastic, might be in Eastern Europe. A lot of metal, which our marketplace focuses on heavily, is going to Asia, so countries like India or Thailand and Malaysia. And the reason for this is that most of the manufacturing of new products happens in these markets. And so the reason I mention this is these sellers were saying they have a hard time even discovering who the buyers are, finding out who the buyers are. And then when they have discovered them, there's like massive issues which make the transaction complex. Number one, essentially, the financing piece. Often it's transiting like 45 to 60 days, and neither seller nor buyer wanna fund that. Second piece is complete lack of trust, because these are people on other sides of the world who operate in very different ways. It's not like doing business with someone in your own city or your own country. And And the third piece, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, was the whole quality piece. So essentially, buyers and sellers have often had situations where they were screwed by one side lying about quality, or one side making up a claim about quality. And the reason this happens a lot in our industry is because it's not a homogeneous like material. It's a heterogeneous material that they're taking in, and they're trying to essentially isolate the valuable material and sell it on. So yeah, these were some of the big problems we saw multiple people talking about in the industry, and that's why we got excited to dive into it. And then your second question about like why have these big manufacturers not been able to increase recycling rates? I think let's separate like plastic and metal because they're quite different. And our marketplace is geared towards mainly PET plastic, which goes into water bottles, and then actually aluminium scrap, especially scrap from things like beer cans or post-consumer material. And actually, what's interesting is that I guess the metal industry and the plastic industry behaves very differently. So for these big metal smelters, it's actually far cheaper for them to buy recycled input material. So it's been a much quicker transition for those guys to move to recycled materials, because even from a pure financial incentive, there's no reason not to do it. For plastics like PET, you're completely right. These Unilevers or Coca-Colas, they can actually be buying virgin input far cheaper than they can be buying this recycled input. So I guess that's why the transition has been longer, because that financial incentive isn't there. And we believe as a company that we can get the price of recycled input far cheaper than virgin, but it needs like optimizations and throughout the value chain for it to happen.
So my next question was just about this optimization. So when you're looking at the entire value chain, straight from collecting from households or commercial establishments, and then going to the sorting facilities, the MRFs, material recovery facilities, how sort of how does the waste come to you as a marketplace? Is it sort of in diverse conditions by the time it comes to you, or do you think that a lot of I'm sure at the MRF facility itself, they have conveyor belts, they have balers, they have various ways to sort different types of plastics, even each other, rigid plastics, flexible plastics, etc. Along with waste and with other types of waste. But just curious how what the quality of it is. What by the time it comes to you, do you need to do a lot of reprocessing on your end? And how much time, capital do you need to kind of make those products, ready for the market?
Yeah, so we don't own any like processing capacity. So we're always connecting essentially material from one seller to one buyer, but the different sellers produce different quality. So just on the extreme version, you have, say, in Africa, we have like a very informal collection center where everything is like hand collected, hand sorted, and baled and loaded onto trucks. That's like the highest quality because it's never really gone into a commingled stream. In the UK, for example, it will all be part of a commingled like recycling bin that's then gone into a facility and has then tried to recapture, say, the PET plastic stream. So that quality is far worse and super variable based on how efficient that process is being run in the market. So I think that's also like the value of a marketplace is that like you don't have a very commoditized product, so the sellers aren't all selling the same SKU. It's not like there's 4 SKUs that are being sold. There's within the same SKU, there's all these different variations, and so if you as a marketplace can be like the one avenue where a buyer can come to and have like full transparency on the quality, they then like keep coming to you and they keep shifting their purchases to your marketplace. And then I guess that the other point you mentioned, that was around like cost for plastic, and how you get the recycled price competitive with the virgin price. What we see is this is an industry that's like riddled with offline traders and brokers that take huge cuts throughout the transaction because of the fact it's not going directly from the source of supply to the source of demand. Africa is a great example of this, where we see like the price difference but from when it leaves the seller to by the time it reaches the ultimate buyer can be anywhere from like 2 to 3x. So yeah, we as a marketplace, and this happens in many industries, is as soon as you can start to disintermediate all these middlemen who don't really add much value, you cut out a lot of costs from the ecosystem.
Mhm. So in terms of when getting the right type of sellers to come to your marketplace, I'm just curious about also government regulation
Yeah,
for selling
for sure,
to different.
for sure. No, this is why we're kind of quite bullish on Africa at the moment. We recently set up a team in Ghana, West Africa, because these are markets where up until a few years ago, everything was just being burnt or landfilled because they didn't appreciate the true value of the commodity if it was sorted out and sold into the international markets. So you've had like suddenly a surge of material coming online. You have then like a population that's going to double between now and 2050. So it's a huge amounts of recyclables are going to be generated in these countries. And then what's interesting about these markets is they're not used to this old school way of doing business because they haven't been running these plants for the last 50, 100 years. So they kind of leapfrog, I guess, some of these more antiquated facilities we work with in Europe and move straight onto like a digital way of managing, their inventory, selling their inventory via a mobile app. So there's like a lot of reasons why we think this is quite exciting. What's interesting though in these markets as well is still the big packaging companies like the Coca-Colas and the Pepsi don't pay anything to fund the collection and recycling of material, which is generally what happens in most countries where there is a sort of extended producer responsibility scheme. So everything that's happening in these countries in Africa, it's all being done by independents. And so as a result, it's like super important for them to be able to access the best possible pricing internationally and have continuous streams of purchases coming on because they can't rely on subsidies from the big FMCGs or from governments.
Mhm. Understood. Um, and what do you say, sort of, I would say, kind of with the whole artificial intelligence, data, being able to kind of, because I remember that, in previous facilities, antiquated facilities, they used to take photographs of the waste, right, which was still very difficult to track. Now we have, as you mentioned, digital kind of technologies that are tracking and kind of identifying waste of multiple different types, 60, 70 different types, and then allocating a price to it, etc. So do you think that investing in this kind of AI technology is sort of extremely important at the processing level, the MRF level?
Yeah, so that's very this is important. I think the more automation you have, you reduce like labor costs, processing costs per ton, and so that helps you get to this lower price point for the FMCGs to switch from virgin material to recycled input. So yeah, we're a big fan of automation in the facilities. That's the first point. Second point is like automatic sorting should guarantee like more consistent quality than manual labor, and a lot of these plants still run on manual labor to sort out material. So again, that like generates higher quality, which leads to much lower waste throughout the value chain, and again, like a lower cost to the FMCGs. I think for us, like as a marketplace, what we realized very early on is to attract buyers onto the marketplace, you need to prove to them that um, you need to de-risk the transaction for them. So these buyers are like being scared of, say, sourcing material from all these random countries they never heard of before, even in Europe or in Africa. And so the only way you like de-risk that for them and get them to purchase is if you can show them like a level of quality control they've never had before. So as we say, in the old days, they were just getting random like WhatsApps of generic bales and being told to purchase on that basis. Whereas now what's cool is like every facility when they sign up, their output is scanned via our computer vision module. Like the exact composition of the bale is analyzed. So, we can say, hey, there's 5% aerosol cans in here, 2% steel can contamination, etc. You can give them the exact breakdown. They then are purchasing or pricing on that basis because they know the exact yield. And then crucially, at the time of loading, we have this like smartphone inspector app which can be used to take a picture of every single bale just before it's uploaded, and it's scanned and checked to see if it meets the specification the buyer bought. So this is like you're light years away from this old way of doing business, but people didn't really know what was happening, didn't really know what they were getting until it showed up at their facility. They would then try and process it, and then there would be this like endless back and forth between sellers and buyers. The amount of like admin cost that this creates in the whole like value chain is crazy. We speak to teams of buyers where they have 20% of their team literally managing these claims or quality disputes because of the fact there's no proper quality control system in place. So yeah, that's why we invest heavily in it, and we think it's very important. What's interesting as well is we think this will flesh out the bad, deceitful sellers out there, because now all of a sudden you have an incentive to create good quality because people see it.
My next question is actually regarding the innovations or expansions that Safi is planning over the next 5 to 10 years. So as you're looking at expanding to more global markets, like so looking at improving material verification, looking at overall trends that are going to shape the recycling industry in the next decade or so, what do you see as kind of the biggest areas that we'll be pushing in terms of your company's mandate?
So yeah, there's a few things. One, I think how the actual transaction happens in moving out fully digital. So today, it's really the case that people are calling each other, WhatsApping each other, meeting each other in person. You'd be quite surprised how much of these to be transaction space is fully offline. Even payments are happening fully offline. So what we are now like pioneering is, how do you allow someone located in the middle of Romania to have a mobile app as soon as they've produced a container load of material, be able to scan it with their smartphone, list it, get an instant price right there, a guaranteed price, and be able to conclude that transaction like immediately. This is, it seems quite straightforward from a B2C lens, but like really in this recycling industry, no transaction happens that way. So that's like the first thing where we're like fully pushing, is how do you build this self-serve way of transacting for both sellers and buyers. I think the second thing we're pushing a lot on is like, how do you really build the best like embedded financing product for these sellers and buyers. I mentioned how it's typically a big deal breaker, and why say a seller in Europe and a smelter in India don't transact, because neither are able to access financing. So if you as a marketplace can really simply build a tool which allows a seller to pick whichever day they want to get paid on, and a buyer to delay payment terms as far as like 30 days post delivery, 60 days post delivery, you suddenly open up so many more permutations or combinations of companies that can transact. So that's like something else that we've been working on, and that's like a complex thing to get right, because there's very few lenders that understand, I guess, European risk as well as Asian risk, and there's very few lenders that typically want to bank recycling industry, given it's like it's had quite a lot of like AML concerns in the past of the industry. So that's the second big thing we look at. And then I think like the other innovation that I think is going to be very exciting is where you can get to in our world, right? For example, there's so much stuff that can go wrong with moving a container of material around the world, because there's regulation on either side. On the seller side, there's like customs. On both sides, there's often like import issues. So like, with these sellers and buyers, again, they waste so much time chasing up on the status of containers, chasing up when things go wrong, like speaking to a freight forwarder who then has to speak to a haulage company. So I think if you can get to a place where all of that is digitized, and like as soon as something goes wrong, they're able to have visibility of it and take action quickly. A bit like what Flexport and Sender have tried to do this for more general like shipping. But I think if we can do this for the recycling industry, it'll be huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it sounds like a very exciting vision for the future. And just, as we come to a close for this conversation, there was another founder looking to start the recycling space, B2B marketplace, similar to Safi. Would it be easier or harder, given that, the world has moved forward in terms of general awareness, regulations, tailwinds, etc., and also the availability of venture capital? So
Yeah, no, I think look, I see now every few months a recycling tech startup coming to life. So I think definitely there's a lot more focus on it from investors. I think climate investors typically didn't spend that much time on it up until a few years ago. But I think the nice thing, if you compare it to, I don't know, some of these more voluntary climate ideas, such as, I don't know, climate offset marketplaces. This is like an industry that's already there. You know, it has to operate for us to function as human society. You know, you're not trying to invent something, or you're not trying to create a trigger. Um, it's already existing. So as a result of that, like, you have a large TAM to already go after. It's a TAM that's going to increase. You know, as I mentioned, with urban populations growing massively in Africa as one example. So it's not going away anytime soon. And I think there are like many different angles that you can target. I think one thing I would say is we learned I think it's hard to build SaaS only business in these older school industries. And when I say SaaS only, I mean, like, these facilities or these operations are not used to this idea of like paying for software only, or like they literally, it's not a concept that they kind of have come across. And so I think for us, what we learn is you have to kind of start with the transaction, start with the thing they do every day, you know, selling or buying material, make that like easier for them, do it in a way where they don't see your service as a cost, but actually, you know, essentially incremental revenue for them. And then only then we think it makes sense to like move and offer like SaaS products for other parts of the operation. And I think, like, maybe in the early days we thought we could sell like pure SaaS into these facilities, and I think that's like very, very hard to do in old school operations. So I think that's like one thing that we've learned. What else has been of like interest on this journey? Yeah, I think like what we're also seeing is definitely, like, when there's such a mass, you know, with recycling, you have so many different types of recycling, from construction and demolition waste that gets recycled to metal to plastic to like fiber, etc. So there's like many of these different angles, but I think you've got to look at the ones where try and find the verticals, I guess, within it, where you think there's like more of a push for these companies to digitize, right? Or there's more of a pressure coming from the key stakeholders to switch to recycled input. I think that's something that maybe in the early days we didn't focus on enough, and I think this year, for example, we tried to get a lot more focused on which materials we're actually focusing our marketplace on.
Great. Well, very excited to see what you do next at Safi, and where the business is going to go. And very confident that it'll grow to great heights. Thank you again, Rishi, for your time today. And having you on board is fantastic. You're actually the second entrepreneur we've had on the podcast. We generally bring
Right.
capital funds, sort of large sovereigns, etc. But it's really nice to have someone who's actually building something operationally, and hearing about your journey as well. So thanks again, and hope to have you back here soon.
Great. Thanks a lot for having me, Priya. Appreciate it. See you.